All right, we're back. Another pod. This one's going to be a good one. If you've been following us here for a while, obviously at higher levels, we've had hundreds, close to 1,000 students now, and we've helped a lot of people break into tech sales. One of the biggest things and the biggest obstacles that people have, or even questions, is one, what are the questions that I should be expecting? And two, how the heck do I go about actually answering them? And today we're going to break down 25 of the top ones that we personally have been through ourselves and that we also see our students going through all the time. And so, of course, we're going to have timestamps down below. And so you can quickly jump through between the different ones if you want to navigate to a specific one or anything else. But nevertheless, we're going to go ahead and try to see if we can mess you up on a couple of these. But anything else, Eric, before we jump in here?
Yeah, I would just say, obviously we're going to go one question at a time. Some of these we're going to give a real answer that I would give like in a game time situation. There's going to be others that we talk about, like for instance, what do you know about our company? And we'll talk through how we would actually prepare for that answer. So it's going to be a combination of both. And just for everyone's reference as well, if you don't have the exact background that we have, we're going to pause after each question, deconstruct what went well, what went poorly, and also talk about how, if you don't have the exact background, the types of things you should prepare and think about when answering the question. So this is going to be a long one. Let's buckle up.
All right, cool. Well, Eric, why don't you start by telling me a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. And, this looking at sales is actually my second career. So I'm curious if there's anything in particular you're looking for. More than happy to elaborate.
Yeah, maybe just walk me through like what kind of brought you here today, and also like what's driving the interest in sales in particular in us.
Sure. Yeah. And, happy to dive into any of these in any more depth, but kind of making a long story short, my first career was in engineering. So I studied wireless engineering in college, broke in at a large tech company, and I was a customer support engineer. So I had the opportunity to support some of the biggest brands in the world like Apple, Facebook, IBM, and other companies that were using our technology. They would call in and I was frontline support to really help them. And it was great. Like it wasn't just, hey, this is broken, and I would tell them to restart it. It's like, hey, our entire production line is down and this component from your company is a key piece. Please help us troubleshoot this. We're losing $100,000 an hour. So it was very intense. It was a very rewarding experience. But in parallel, I was actually a student athlete in college and played for Team USA in a sport called team handball. So I was actually still competing while I was a full-time engineer, and ultimately found myself wanting a more competitive professional career. And also in my engineering role, I really enjoyed the customer interaction. So ultimately in 2018 and kind of into 2019, I decided to take the year off and compete overseas. And I knew at that point I wanted to transition away from a direct engineering role, which kind of brings us to today, and kind of making a long story short again. For me, looking at the next move in my career, I really enjoyed the tech space. But having been an athlete for so long, I'm highly, highly motivated to be compensated based on my performance. So that's been a huge driver for me. And I think, I'm very fortunate for the experience I had in engineering. I think that, could potentially set me up well to do well in tech sales. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm more than happy to elaborate on any of that as well.
Nice. How'd you feel about it?
I felt pretty good.
Yeah.
Obviously I kind of jumped around and caught myself talking about a bunch of different things, but I think it kind of wove together pretty well. And I think the important thing for anyone watching, at least in my mind, is always giving the interviewer, especially in a long question like that, where there could be lots of information, try and make it short, but give them the ability to like probe into it. So I always end that type of question by saying like, hey, I'm more than happy to elaborate on any of those points. But that kind of summarizes, making a super long story short, why we're here today.
Yeah.
So, but what were your thoughts?
I thought it was really good. I liked how you asked me first, like, is there anything specifically that you want to know? Because a lot of the times you can't read their minds, right? Like you want to actually try to probe into the specific areas that they want to know about. Typically it's just going to be like kind of a conversation starter. So this will be like one where, and you did really well for being on the spot. You don't have anything in front of you.
Yeah.
For me personally, I actually like to write down the specific answer. And so like I'll have, a little bit of a block of text for every single experience that I have. And I'll actually try to like time myself on like, can I do this within 1 to 2 minutes? I think you actually stuck to 1 to 2 minutes perfectly. So Again, spending a little bit more time on this one specifically because this is going to be one that pops up like all the time and one
Every
that
time.
people mess up on. And this kind of like sets the tone for the rest of the interview too, right?
Yep.
Like I would almost say like if you don't, necessarily script things, this might be a good one just to like write down and practice a lot. Because if you answer this like confidently, it just sets the tone for the rest of the call. You feel a little bit more confident. You'll get into it. It'll just be a better experience every single time.
Yeah.
But no, I thought it was solid.
And I think one other thing to emphasize that you said, just for everyone watching as well, is like this question in my mind is of any answer going to be the longest. Mm-hmm. But that being said, there should never be an answer that's longer than 120 seconds. Yeah. Ideally 90. And if it's any other question, like we'll talk about, usually 60 to 90 at most. But I think this one, to Chris's point, like I've done this so many times that I can rattle it off my head. But I think it is important, to your point, like document it down, practice this, and literally like get a stopwatch or the timer on your phone. And until you put 90 seconds ticking down, so you can't even exceed it. So 90 seconds ticking down, until you can do that consistently, you're not ready to answer this question, in my opinion, because something we'll get into, but it really does set the stage for the rest of the interview. Yep. When you have a solid answer like that talks about, why you want to be in tech sales, you've immediately like closed the door for them to probe into like engineering experience that may not be relevant. And they're like, wow, that's great. Like, let's talk about your desire to be in sales. And now you can, like, we'll talk about like really make a strong case for yourself. So
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, Eric, why do you want to work for us specifically?
Yeah, there's a few different things that come to mind. To be transparent, I do have a few conversations going on with a couple of other companies, but I think the thing that really stands out to me about yours in particular is when I look at the training program and the emphasis that you put on new SDRs having full training from leadership and all of the things that are mentioned in your training program. That really stands out to me, having that engineering background. The technical side I feel confident in, but really the sales side is where I'm looking for guidance and looking to have experienced leaders. And like, for instance, like Tom, I saw Tom's LinkedIn profile, who's the director of sales development. He's been in the industry for 15 years. So learning from someone like that is going to be a huge benefit for me. And then lastly, and I'm again happy to elaborate further, but I've seen also how many SDRs you hire, but also how many you retain. And for instance, it almost looks like the SDRs that perform very well are consistently getting promoted to account executive every 12 to 18 months pending performance. So that's very exciting and enticing for me.
Nice. I think that's pretty solid. I think that you're showing that you've done your research in a very like low key way. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's key. And I think it's all about like how you add that in without being like over the top. Yeah. Right. But I think in this way you have an opportunity to actually talk about like, yeah, like this is why I want to work for you guys because I saw XYZ. But you're not like coming out of the woodworks with like absolutely no context. Yeah. So I thought it was really solid. I don't know if you have any feedback on that.
Yeah, I just say for everyone watching, that answer is typically going to play well at a larger company because they're typically, those are a lot of the things that they're going to try and show to SDRs is like, look at the training, look at the brand recognition. So the only thing I'd say if you're going to a startup is I think a really good takeaway there is to research the manager you would be working for and the types of people that are at that startup and just talk about your desire to learn from them. And also, like for instance, for me, when I broke into sales, I intentionally chose a 250 person company because all respect to my engineering job in the past, but I hated working at a 10,000 plus person company. It was horrible. Just so much red tape. Anyway, I digress. So I think if you want to talk about the types of people you'd be working for at a startup, and also for me, like there's a compelling story I've told before where I worked at a large company and I learned a ton about industry best practices, but I felt really constrained and limited in what I could do. And going to your company, I've seen how fast it's growing, but how agile it still is. That's a very exciting challenge for me. That's another way you could spin it. So.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, situationally to the size of the company that you're going to, right? Like I think the more of the pieces that you can make fit together for them as to why they're a good fit for you as well, makes them a lot more confident. So yeah, like I actually used to do that all the time. It's like if I was going to a smaller startup from a bigger company, and I would be like, hey, I just kind of like miss being like in a smaller startup environment. I miss having like, more of an impact in the role that I have, all those different things. Or if you want to go to a bigger company, you could twist it around. You could say, I want to learn how the best enterprises are doing it. I want to learn, like, it's all about like kind of adapting it to the situation. So
100%.
Cool. And I know we spoke a little bit about this in the first question, but if we isolate this is one that people are definitely going to hear if they're breaking into tech sales, but why tech sales?
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned this earlier with my background in athletics, but I think for me, I'm fortunate to have a past career, which I think gives me a lot of perspective compared to, when I first graduated college. And for me, I've always been a competitive person. And to be honest, I think, like, for instance, both my parents are engineers. So I didn't even know really the ins and outs of sales. And when I got into my own career as an engineer and I saw that sales was a valid path, it kind of just started to consume my mind. I've self-taught a lot, read a lot about business. And again, at the end of the day, the most exciting thing for me is to be able to leverage that technical background that I do have, but really be rewarded for the work. And just honestly, I think you're forced to improve and you're forced to perform at your highest level when you are attaining at a quota, and there are consequences for not attaining that quota. So honestly, it's an exciting challenge for me.
Nice. Oh, that was good. What do you think about it? Yeah,
I stumbled a little bit there. I think I was trying to maybe do a little too much. Mm-hmm. But I think at the end of the day, like, really, pending your background and, if you have sales experience before, you're going to have to focus and convince them that you're not just chasing the trend of tech sales. In my case, coming from a different career into tech sales, what they're really asking is, are you okay with having a quota? Mm-hmm. And I think you really want to get out in front of that. And that's the important thing I tried to address is, like, I am, like, leaning into and looking forward to having a quota. And I know that it's going to be a challenge, but I also am the kind of person that enjoys that challenge and grows when that challenge is there. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the story you want to paint if you're coming from a non-sales background, is just letting them know, like, hey, I am actively excited and looking forward to the challenge of having a quota and the potential of being rewarded if I do perform well.
Yeah.
So
no, I agree. I think this is a really good one where you have an opportunity to kind of show that you're a hard worker by subconsciously saying it. So, like, the way that I always answer this one, or if, like, there's anything that relates to this, it's always like, hey, for me, I was a professional athlete in my past life. And so I needed to take my psychotic drive and put it into something else.
Yeah.
But this is an opportunity for you to say, like, whatever you were doing before, right? Like, you are actually excited to be in an environment where, one, you're going to be compared to other people. Two, you can now take all of this energy, this success energy that you had, and throw it into something where you're directly compared to other folks. Because if you can get ahead of some of the questions, right, like, you actually answered several of the questions that we're going to talk about later on, but you're getting ahead of them here.
Yeah.
And so the recruiter, or me as the recruiter here, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, like, I'm checking off the boxes. So yeah. 100%.
No, and I think that's one last call out too, is, like, yeah, like, honestly, I am answering some of the questions we have here ahead of time, mm-hmm. but I would encourage you, when done the right way, to kind of do that. You don't want to do that and take 5 minutes and just ramble on and on. But again, by getting so far out in front of, like, why tech sales, another question we'll get to is, like, what do you think about, commission or competition? When you really build that strong and consistent narrative, yeah, it's like the recruiter's like, wow, I don't even feel like I have to ask these questions. Like, yeah. Let's get this person to the next round. You know? So
no, 100%. Okay, this next one is going to be a little bit interesting. This is more of a framework question, but Eric, how much do you know about our company?
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier about the training program, and that's certainly something that's really exciting to me. I would say more on, a market fit and technology side. I had a chance to dive into a lot of your case studies, and the one with Verizon actually particularly stood out. I'm seeing consistently how, compared to your industry peers, like, it seems like insert product feature of this company is really uniquely differentiated. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, I'd love to get your perspective, but it seems like feature 1 or 2 or 3 major features or product offerings of this company are truly differentiated, and, like, no one can even compete. So to be able to uncover those types of opportunities, to be able to work on huge projects with companies like Verizon and solving a problem that you are only uniquely qualified to solve, that is really what stood out to me amongst the couple of companies that I am speaking with.
Nice. How'd you feel about it?
I felt pretty good. Honestly, I kind of made that one up off the top of my head. It's kind of hard without having, like, I have specific companies I want to talk about in my brain.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to leave it generic, for those watching. But I think that's the important thing, is you're going to have multiple chances to talk about what you like about the company. So I think there's one talk track if it's a bigger company like we've talked about, to talk about the training. But then you definitely don't want to come in and look, you don't have to know the ins and outs of the technology, but if you read 3 or 4 case studies, you can get a sense for the types of things that the company is solving particularly well.
Yeah.
And why that company is chosen over its competitors. So I think if you can sprinkle 1 or 2 of those in, and again, it hits back on this idea of like subconsciously showing that you've done research without being like canned or like so nervous that you're clearly like reading off of a note card. But also I think creating that conversation, because I think there's often times where recruiters or sales managers, when they ask that question, there's no expectation that you're perfect. But if you show that and then ask them for their perspective and they really like you and the conversation's going well, when you ask them like, what did I miss? Or is there anything else you'd add? They actually are going to be like, yeah, 1, that's great research. And 2, just for your reference, also hint, hint, next round, you're probably going to get asked a lot about this.
Yeah.
Here's like the 3 to 5 major things you should know about us. But what were your thoughts?
I thought it was good. I think like I think you did a really good job of navigating like features. I would say one thing that I see a lot of, you know, students and just like people in general like mistakes make is they kind of get like really deep down the rabbit hole of features. You did a really good job of it, but it's very, very easy to get like really deep down that rabbit hole and trying to like list out like every single little thing that they do. 100%. I would just keep it higher level in terms of like the transformation that they provide for different customers and companies. So like, you know, like 1, the specific verticals they're selling into, what's the overarching transformation, what are the typical like ICPs, like ideal customer profiles, so like who are the people that they're typically selling into. But I think you did a really good job. Like I think it was like the perfect balance. This is just something that I'm telling you guys out there, is like be very, very careful not to cross the line of getting into too many features. But I think you did a really good job of it.
Well, I think one last thing you bring up too, another angle is you could say like, hey, I looked at the case studies and you guys are working with anyone from, you know, 25 person angel invested or, you know, YC backed companies all the way up to, you know, Fortune 100, you know, Samsung, Microsoft, Apple.
Yep.
So the ability to be able to work and connect with companies of all sizes in the industry is something that like is really unique and exciting. So just calling out another thing.
No, that's solid. I mean, those are usually the things that I look at is like 1, what are the verticals they're selling into? What are the types of customers, the titles, right? And how big are these companies as well? I think like if you can name those things off, like, and you don't even have to say that you looked at the customer case studies. You can also just say like, hey, yeah, I did some research. Here's what I was able to figure out. Curious if like, am I off mark there? But I like your approach too. Like the fact that you went straight to case studies just, it shows a lot. So, okay, cool. Next one here. Eric, why do you want to leave your current role?
Yeah, you know, I kind of mentioned it, but I think it's kind of twofold. Like 1, I'm in a great place where I've worked really hard and I think I've proven my brand there. And also when I look ahead for the next 5 years, there's certainly a room to grow. But I think, you know, to get to the types of level of compensation that, again, pending my performance, tech sales could provide, we're talking about another 5 to 10 years. I may even have to take a master's in engineering. And you know, like I mentioned, to be honest, the low level, deep engineering work really isn't the most exciting thing to me anymore. So I think it's been a great experience, but unless I'm willing to commit to 15 to 20 more years where I'm at, it's really not worth it. And so I think now is the perfect time to make that transition into tech sales. And don't get me wrong, I know I've absolutely got to prove myself, but I definitely want to tap into that, you know, 5 to 10 year upside of tech sales, and I'm ready to kind of make that the full focus of my career moving forward.
Nice. How'd you feel?
Pretty good, yeah. And I'd say for, you know, obviously for anyone that doesn't have that engineering background, I think if you're not a fresh grad and you are coming from a different industry, it's really important to just make sure that you've had a solid experience, right? Like kind of basics interviewing 101, like never talk shit about your past company. But I also think it's important, without going overboard, to talk about like, yeah, I've enjoyed it. I've done well. I think worked hard to make a good name, and I'm seen in a good light where I'm at currently. And then it's about the limit of the career, not the specific company, right?
Yeah.
So you never paint them in a bad light. And you know, if you are like a new grad, as an example, I think it's kind of the same story, but just about your degree, right? So maybe you studied marketing, or maybe you studied engineering, and I think that's a great story. It's like, listen, I loved what I studied, but when I looked at the career, tech sales 5 to 10 years into this has a substantially higher potential when it comes to income, when it comes to the types of work that aligns to my personality. That's the most exciting thing to me. So just a reference for anyone out there who can spin it to a professional work experience or school or whatever it might be. But what are your thoughts?
No, I thought it was really good. And I think you're really good at like showing that you've done additional research. Obviously, you know more about tech sales, so it's easier for you to do. Mm-hmm. But I think like for anybody else out there, just like watching this, you know, it's about doing these things subconsciously in a subtle way that shows that like, hey, you understand what you're getting yourself into, especially if you're making a leap into tech sales from a completely like different vertical. Show that like, hey, you understand. And there's nothing wrong with beating around the bush too, of like saying, hey, you want more upside. Yeah. Like one thing that I would always say is like, hey, I'm the type of person who puts 150% into every single thing that I do. And so for me, it's important that like whatever I choose to put my energy into, it's something where I can be properly rewarded. And then of course, like, don't talk shit about your past employers, right? Always like bring it back to like, hey, it's a tough position. I really love it here. I've made some really, really deep and strong and long lasting relationships, but I feel like right now where I'm currently at, you know, tech sales is a better fit for me and aligns better with my goals and where I'm trying to go. So I think that was perfect. Like you crushed it on that.
Awesome.
Cool. Eric, what do you know about the SDR role?
Yeah, you know, I'm fortunate to actually have some people that I've reached out to at some of the companies, even here. I actually had a chance to connect with Sarah, who is an SDR that joined from University of Texas. We had a quick chat about the role, and you know, I understand here specifically that you know, obviously you need to make cold calls and emails, about 30 to 50 calls a day. You're also going to be emailing all types of personas from engineers all the way up to CTOs. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack, and I'm happy to elaborate more. But it's really, I think, learning the product first and foremost, and the processes that are going to make you successful the first 3 months. And then as you kind of phase into the day-to-day, it's really staying organized, really putting an emphasis on making sure you're hitting your daily KPIs of calls and emails. And then ideally, as you get that workflow down, you keep getting sharper and sharper, and really can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of all of your different outreach. So that's at the highest level. I'm happy to go deeper, but yeah.
Nice. That was good. How do you feel?
Yeah, I think that was a better than average answer. It wasn't the best possible, but I think, you know, I kind of mentioned for those of you watching as well, whether it's you've been as proactive as reaching out to someone at the company, or you can just talk about someone you know that is in sales. I think that's a good one. You don't want to overemphasize it, but just say, hey, yeah, like obviously this position is new to me, but I've gone, you know, out of my way to network in, whether that's again, people at the company, people in your network, whatever. And here's briefly what I understand. But I think lastly, and what I tried to do is like bring it back to the company itself and just talk about how, you know, for me, it's about, especially these bigger companies that have training, you know, it's like for me, coming in, the most important thing is going to be maximizing this training. I'm never going to have such a great opportunity to learn everything I can about the company, the landscape, the product, and then talking about kind of, you know, it's not that the cold calls and emails aren't important, but it's like if that's all you say is right. Like, yeah, you got to make cold calls and emails. It's like, well, no shit. You know, like I don't know, but what are your thoughts?
No, I actually thought it was really, really good. I really liked the way that you mentioned that you had talked to other folks. Because I think like that's something that they specifically look for. Again, this is going to depend a lot on like the pipeline that you currently have. Like if you have a whole lot of interviews, you obviously can't necessarily speak to everybody. Mm-hmm. But you know, if you can throw it in there that like, hey, I'm obviously trying to make a calculated decision here, and so I have several friends that are SDRs. You can also just say that, you know, just talk a little bit about like the research that you've done, and like this is your impression of like what the role is, XYZ. Curious, like if I'm like you can use the same framework. Like curious if there's anything off there, or if you guys are doing anything particularly out of the ordinary there.
Yeah.
Something like that, you know, but like, I think, yeah, like that's a great way to just show that like, hey, you know what you're getting yourself into. But I really liked it. And yeah, if you do go to that length, which I highly suggest, like if this is a top target for you, definitely reach out to people from the company, right? Like look to see if you can reach out to the top performers, because if they see that like one, you know how to identify the top performers, you know like who they are, and you've actively connected with them. I mean, chances are maybe even if you have a good conversation with them, they'll have your back. Because you're going to go back and they're going to say, hey, did you talk to this guy, or did you talk to her? And they're going to be like, yeah, like they're actually awesome, like really good fit. So yeah, like, and there's really like, if you didn't have a good conversation, you just don't mention them.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, like it's like you can't lose. So yeah, I think it was really, really good.
Awesome.
Okay, cool. Next one here. What do you think would make you a great salesperson?
Yeah, you know, for me, like I mentioned, you know, I've always been driven by competition. Funny story for another time, but I'm actually a twin. So I think even growing up, you know, being constantly compared to my brother, honestly, like fueled a lot of fire and maybe an unnecessary at times, like desire to improve and like be better, right? So I think that's always been motivating for me. But on top of that, I would say specific to my situation, especially looking at a highly technical product like insert company name, having that technical background, that in of itself is not going to make me the best salesperson ever. But I think having the aptitude to understand that and knowing, I was a frontline engineer for 3 years, right? So I think kind of really knowing the types of person that I'm going to be selling to, going to be calling into, that's really going to set me up well to succeed. And lastly, I think not to be overlooked, what I think is going to set me apart is being in an environment that puts a huge emphasis on training and really trying to help people who really want to become top performers be able to do so very quickly. So I think across all of that, that's really what's going to set me up well.
Nice. How'd you feel?
Solid, yeah. And again, for anyone watching, I think it's, the real structure there is like, maybe if you have it, if not a big deal, but maybe like a personal story. So I didn't want to just talk about being an athlete because I know that's our tendency to do.
Yeah.
I am a twin, and if you have a twin, you're constantly compared as a kid. So I think a fun personal anecdote like that, or very brief story about what made you competitive could be good. If there's things that are relevant from your career, maybe again, you're not that engineer, but you were a bank teller. Like we filmed something earlier today with a student of ours that was a customer facing banker. Or, maybe you're an accountant, but you've gone really deep into analysis and you've worked with like analytical and mathematically oriented personas. Those are things you can talk about as to like knowing that in of itself is not going to make you good, but it gives you a unique edge. And that's the most important thing I did there is I'm not saying like, hey, I'm smart. I'm saying, hey, I'm different than 90% of the people that walk in here that don't have that aptitude, whatever that is. So highlight that angle. And then lastly, bring it into the fact that like, hey, I know I'm new to this, but I'm actively seeking out the highest performance environments because I know that's where I'm going to learn the most. And I know if I work at your company that I'm going to have the best chance of succeeding as a salesperson. So it's kind of that perfect angle of your personal anecdote, but also giving them credit and acknowledging that you're going to learn from them, not just come in and like be naively like the best salesperson ever.
Yep.
So
no, this is really like a different way to ask, like, do you have the aptitude and grit to like go into this? Do you have like the mental fortitude? Yeah. Again, like all the questions are just different ways of asking you, do you have any clue what you're getting yourself into?
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I think that was really good. And I definitely agree. Like if you can talk a little bit more about like personal anecdotes, because you don't want to sound like the person who has just read the 10 best questions and answers on Google before you went into this. Like that is 99% of people that are applying for these roles, especially if you're going for, I mean, this is something that we put a strong emphasis on inside of our course. Like our students are going for the best companies in the world. Yeah. And so, these might fly. Like if you're just going with generic answers at like smaller companies or like, companies that don't have too much traction and like in a very like loose environment. But I would say if you're going for really competitive companies, this is how you stand out. Yep. Bring it back to your own experience. Make them laugh a little bit too, right? Like I thought that was pretty funny. Like, oh, you're a twin. Like, yeah. So like, yeah, I liked it. That was cool. Cool, Eric. Tell me about a time that you had to overcome adversity. How'd you do it? And what are the steps you took?
Yeah, I think, unique to my situation, one of the most challenging things was when I graduated college. Like I'm fortunate for all of this experience, but I was an athlete and we didn't qualify for the Rio Olympics, and I had to make a difficult choice. Am I going to continue training full time? Or, I was very fortunate to get a great offer from a large tech company, and ultimately it made sense to go there. But like I mentioned, one of the most challenging things was getting 6 to 12 months there and realizing like it probably wasn't going to be the long-term path for my career, but also not getting upset or worried about the fact that it was also limiting my ability to compete athletically. So I think in that situation, it was really tough, but I ultimately, honestly like lowered my burn rate, my lifestyle. So I actually got an Olympic lifting coach here in Austin to help me while I was doing that. And then on top of that, I competed in my first half marathon, and I also got a weight set in my garage to continue training. So ultimately, I took about a year off when I first was an engineer, but then the year after that, I got back into it, and I honestly was even stronger than when I had left from training full time with Team USA. When I started competing with them again after a year off, I was actually stronger and really didn't miss a beat because I just kind of leaned into that discomfort and did what I had to do to make it happen. So
nice. How'd you feel?
Solid. I think the one thing, that's a pretty unique story, obviously, but I think, for those of you that, I think a good one to talk about is maybe you went for a degree, or maybe you had to work and go to school at the same time, or something, and it was particularly difficult. I think those stories are really good in talking about getting to a goal. Maybe some of you have heard of like the STARS format before, like situation, task, action, and result. I didn't necessarily go into that like to a T, but I think if there's anything you take away from that, again, 90 seconds at most, set the stage as to why this story is important in the first place. Talk very briefly about kind of the things that you did to address it, and then also make sure you mention some type of outcome. And again, there's so much more I could have gone into there, but I also left it, and I've kind of done this as a theme throughout, is the way that I ended the question, you could easily ask more about it. But I'm not sitting there talking about this soap opera for 5 minutes that was great for the first minute, and now they're like, damn, finish up, dude. So I don't know. What were your thoughts?
No, I thought it was good. I mean, I think it's such a niche example. So like, I think it's solid. I would say, like, for the people out there that are watching this, obviously, like, if you haven't been training for the Olympics, or like done anything as grand as that, it's completely fine. Like, what they're looking for here is just like identify some sort of challenge or obstacle, then quickly illustrate like the steps that you took to actually like face the challenge. I mean, for me, like, I had a very similar story as yours. I used the fact that, like, prior to the Olympic trials, I tore my Achilles, had to change my life, blah, blah, blah. But that's a very extreme situation. I mean, it could be something as simple as, like, hey, you were about to fail a class. Like, if you're a college grad, like, you're about to fail a class. This class was super important to land an internship or whatever else. What you did was you found out, who the best tutor was. Again, like, it can be something as simple as that. Great right example. But just the fact that, like, you're putting in the work, you're identifying where you actually have weaknesses, and then you're doing something about it, and you put in the time, you put in the effort. I mean, it sounds generic, it sounds vanilla, but you'd be surprised at, like, how bad people are at actually answering this. Some people just break down completely. So I mean, but I think the framework remains the same, right? Just identify whatever it was that was tough, whatever was a challenge, the steps that you took, and then the outcome, the result of, like, all the different things that you did.
And I think, like, one last example for people watching out there as well is, like, this can also be personal. Like, we had a student that is at Snowflake, one of the best companies in the world, that had a huge fitness transformation in college. They were overweight, they weren't excited about it, and, like, the outcome of that is that, sure, I mean, yes, they're in better shape, but they had a really great story as to why, like, they hadn't really been in incredible shape before, and it really allowed them to perform academically, personally, with relationships and all of these different things. So there's numerous examples there, but my point being is, like, even if you don't have something that's like, I was a C student and I tried really hard and got like an A, and it's like this curated, like, academic or professional experience, there can be great personal examples as well. So just adding that in there as well.
Yeah, I would also say, like, just a cool one, maybe also to mention, if you have nothing and you're just blanking out, you can even talk about, like, your journey so far and your transformation into tech sales. Like, what did you do to land this interview? What did you have to change? Where'd you start? Like, that brings a level of transparency that I think is, like, very much overlooked. That would just, like, that just popped to my mind. But again,
great example.
About, like, delivery as well. So, all right, Eric, tell me about an accomplishment that you're particularly proud of.
I think the one that comes to mind right now, like, when I was in college, I got involved. I was on the national team. I also supported and played with the club team. And I was also in a social fraternity as well. And I found that I kind of was the person that really liked to take on too much. And honestly, I think I just reached a point where I was taking on too much and overcommitting to a lot of different things. So oddly enough, kind of making a long story short, like, I actually got my first ever 4.0 GPA in college my senior year. So it took me a really long time to kind of, like, figure this out. But I think that's one thing that's been really exciting to me, because I was always a decent student, but even going back to, like, high school, I was never straight A's. And to have arguably my hardest engineering semesters, to get a 4.0, I would say, aside from, athletics and some of the other things I've been involved with, is kind of one that, like, personally maybe matters even more than like playing for Team USA at times, to be honest. So that's one that comes to mind.
Nice. I like that one personally. How'd you feel about it?
Yeah, I like that. I think, again, I want to give an example here of, I'm sure most of you have, like, one or two things that you can talk about. So I hope the variety of examples here gets you thinking, because, again, we're not saying make things up, but I do think a lot of times people put so much pressure on themselves in these interviews that they feel like there's something they don't take and give themselves enough credit for some things that they think are ordinary that are actually like stand out. So even a simple example of how even for one semester, if you got a 4.0 GPA, like that's something that you can put your hat on, especially if you had never done that. And again, like at the end of the day, does anyone now that I'm like, almost 10 years out of college give a shit about my 4.0? No. And I can argue that a 4.0 student would not do well in sales, but I think the way it was packaged and just talking about like the story there that you're proud of, just make a short story about not being there first, progressing towards it, and then achieving that result. And even I kind of ended it intentionally like lighthearted and joked about, because it's like, I think that's a good way to like sprinkle in some humility, not like, hey, I'm this 4.0 engineering national team athlete, like I just come in and dominate, right?
Yeah.
Like I kind of just like made it like, honestly at times, like to me, that's like, I'm more personally proud of that than like playing for Team USA, like haha, like or whatever that might be, right? Whether it's like, hey, I'm more proud of like making this incredible cake for my mom's birthday than I am, getting my first paycheck in corporate America, right? Like some type of joke like that or some story. So and I don't know, what are your thoughts?
No, that's good. I mean, it's funny. I actually was interviewing an SDR at HashiCorp, my last company, and this guy, I mean, just to show you guys like how far out this can be, he actually was telling me about like how he was like he taught himself how to do a magic trick. Okay. And like on the call, I was like, okay, where is this going? Like, this is very interesting. And he literally prefaced by saying, this is either going to like make or break the interview. And I thought it was so funny. He actually like showed me the magic trick, like live. And he like took me through, like he could only find like a set of Uno cards, and he literally performed the magic trick. And then he talked to me about like how he actually prepped for it. It wasn't anything crazy. He just like started watching YouTube videos and taught himself how to do it. But I think like the lightness of it, and like it's a lot about your tone, right? Like how do you deliver the message? Yeah. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. You don't have to change the world. Yeah. You just have to like give them an impression that one, like you're somebody who they can actually see themselves working with, and you have good energy, right? Yeah. So like, yeah, you can definitely identify things that are particularly like powerful and impactful and life-changing and all these different things, but it doesn't have to be crazy either. Yeah. You can also deliver something that's super cool and a really good tone and leave a really strong impression, because that arguably left the best impression with me just because of how funny it was. Yeah. And again, you don't have to be a jokester. Like, you don't have to go crazy. I've seen bad examples of that too. Yeah. But yeah, just saying. It's
a great call. Great call.
So, okay, cool. Eric, tell me about a time where you failed.
Yeah. To be honest, I think it's funny that we're interviewing today because of the fact that like if there's a failure, I suppose, that I have, like I kind of got the bug for entrepreneurship / sales even when I was in college. And I was about, a year away from graduating, and I started reading a ton of books and just naturally started following my interest in business and sales and all of these different things. And to be honest, if there's anywhere I failed, I think it's waiting almost 4 years to actually make the transition to tech sales. There's a lot of earning potential that I left on the table, but I also think, again, all respect to the jobs that I had in the past, but I got in a good routine. I was well respected. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't really progressing and kind of just taking those on autopilot when I could have made that transition sooner, and I could have really pushed myself outside of my comfort zone, which I wish would have happened sooner than today, but obviously glad to be here. So
nice. How'd you feel?
Pretty good. Yeah. I think, I think it's a solid answer, and I don't want someone to watch this and have every answer come back to like why tech sales, why tech sales, why tech sales. Mm-hmm. But I hope that gives someone a good barometer of like, maybe you studied a major or you didn't go to college, but that indecisiveness cost you, time to progress your career, or you've been in a career that was boring and you didn't do anything about it, and now you're here. I think that, I'd be curious your feedback, but I think hopefully that answer, like that's a pretty universal answer that almost anyone can tap into. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like the way that it was kind of like a spin-off on the question, right? Like you kind of took it a different direction, which was pretty cool. I think you can also definitely keep it static. So like you can use a specific concrete example of like something that you did where you messed up, like maybe you were learning something for the first time. Again, it's similar to the other question where we were talking about like, hey, how'd you overcome an obstacle? Just a different way of asking it. So like it can also be something as static, and I still like the way that you did it. Again, like the way that you speak, the way that you present things, make the delivery well enough to where like that was well perceived on my end. Yeah. But for somebody else out there, if you want to keep it like super simple, you can just make it very static. You can talk about like how, yeah, like this happened, and ultimately you were trying to get to why. This is the mistakes that you're finding yourself making all the time. as a result of that, you realize that like these were the specific things they needed to change.
Yeah.
And so I started engaging with XYZ person. We were starting to, work on these things every single week. Again, you're just telling them your framework for like, what do you do in the event that something messes up?
Yeah.
Right. So like, it can also be something as static as like when you messed up and then you improved.
Yeah. What you learned.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great call.
But it was still really good. Like, again, this is an art. This isn't a science.
Yeah.
And so like you can take all of these and you can spin them. If your delivery is really good, honestly, like that left me with a really strong impression too. I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool spin on it.
Yeah.
But it's like the only thing is like you don't have to think outside the box all the time, especially for somebody else out there who isn't as tenured as you. I think you have a tendency to like, you can think really quickly on your feet, plus you have the actual like aptitude of sales.
Mm-hmm.
But for somebody out there who doesn't have, the sales aptitude and can't fall back on like necessarily exactly how to always bridge it back, you can always just keep it pretty simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
But I thought it was solid too. Okay, cool. Eric, how do you feel about cold calling?
Love it. Yeah. Honestly, I've always been an extroverted person. But I think more than that, in my past role, like I mentioned, I was a support engineer. So to be honest, like I took a lot of calls where customers would call and their world was on fire. And so I know cold calls can maybe seem daunting, and I'm not expecting that I come in and I'm the best on day one. But I will say I have taken calls where someone has called in and completely chewed me out for a problem that I had nothing to do with. Like, certainly it was my responsibility to fix, don't get me wrong. But the problem that was created was because of a bad product or something broke or something that I had no control of. So I think, for me, and kind of tying this all together to, really wanting the compensation piece for my efforts, I think the fact that, I'm sure it's going to be uncomfortable, but I've done that before and I didn't get quota for that. So now to be able to do that and to be able to make money doing that is very exciting for me. So
nice. I like that a lot. How'd you feel about it?
I felt really good. That's a real answer that I've given in the past. It obviously hit home when I was first breaking into sales in general. Mm-hmm. And I think to anyone out there, it's like, one, talk about extroversion, but don't make that your whole platform. Like, I'm a social person. I was in a fraternity and all this. Like, even if you made one call or a couple of calls to like do something, or for instance, like one of the ones when I first broke into engineering, because they'll still ask you like, tell me about a time where you presented. One of the things that I would go back to is like when I was in college and on the sports team, I had to submit the budget to the rec center for the college club team. And a lot of times there were just that whole system was so petty and dumb, to put it simply, that like I had a really good storyline around how I had to present to someone who had run the rec for 20 years and didn't budge. And I really had to make a point as to highlight, not take their first no for an answer. Yeah. And I had to really articulate why it was very important for us to get an extra $500 of funding or something like that, which the university had. They were just holding back because they didn't feel they had the justification. So I won't go down that storyline, but hopefully that sparks an idea for anyone watching. And obviously, curious your thoughts.
Yeah. No, I thought it was really good. I mean, here's a spin on it that I would always do and that people really, really like. Like, this was always pretty well perceived, but I would always get into like, if you don't necessarily have any experience with cold calling, which I didn't necessarily have any experience with cold calling before I got into tech sales, I would call it out. I was like, I don't necessarily have too much experience with cold calling, but honestly, that's a big part of like why I think it's exciting. I kind of look at sales as like personal development in disguise. And so I'm trying to put myself in a position where like I have to overcome some of these things. Yeah. But like, I think it's exciting. I think it's super cool to see people like absolutely crush a cold call, like going into it with like barely any context or just, know exactly what to say. So like, I think like you can also call out the fact that you don't necessarily know much about cold calling, but you're willing to get yourself into these like uncomfortable situations, because that's really what they're asking you, right? Like, they're asking you like, hey, are you gonna like be a bitch when you get into the role, like, or are you gonna like, And so like, I think like you can just tackle that head on. You can say like, hey, like I'm actually looking forward to it, and that's what you did. You were literally like right away. You said, hey, I love it. Like, I think it's exciting. I think it's fun. Yeah. So if you don't have any experience, you can just say that you're looking forward to actually getting into it because you feel like you're going to grow as a person. Again, you don't have to keep it like super zen, but like that's a very, like, anytime I said that, they're always like, oh, that's really cool. Like, great answer.
Yeah. Great call.
100%. Okay, Eric, tell me about a time where you had to work with a team to achieve something.
Yeah. I would say, like, obviously, one, I'm happy to talk about my athletic achievements, but I know I've talked about that a lot. So I think, honestly, going back to my senior design team, we actually ended up making a project. It was 4 of us, and we ended up having to make a system that would actually tell you how to adjust a rifle scope based on the wind and the atmosphere. And so, to make a super long story short, like, one of our guys on our team clearly had the expertise. And I think I noticed pretty early on that our team really struggled to package that in a way for the actual presentation, right? Because part of our grade, and a heavy part of it, was the technical side. Don't get me wrong, and I definitely contributed there. But there was about 30%, they actually, when we presented for our final project, that was being graded by the business school on the viability of just the presentation skills, how consumable it was to someone who wasn't a hardcore engineering student. And I think that's something I really took the lead on. Obviously graduated here today, but
you made it.
Yeah, and I'm happy to dive into it more. But I think honestly, it even ties into why I'm excited about tech sales. Is like, that's something that I got really passionate about when I realized what a gap it was, because I had seen some of the best presentations from the prior semester, and when we did our first pass, I was like, this is terrible. So I got really passionate about it, and that's one example of many. But yeah.
Nice. That was probably one of my favorite answers from you. What do you like? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think so too. And I think just kind of interview 101, regardless of your answer. I didn't make any of my teammates look bad, and I also helped. I filled a gap. I wasn't the person who was like the macho number one, completely took the situation over and ran it. And again, if you have a story like that, that's fine. But I would say like 90+% of stories, like, it's okay to be a functioning, contributing team member, not necessarily the number one person, right? And I gave credit in that answer to someone in our group that was highly, highly technical, that did a lot of the heavy lifting on the tech side, and then just really made it clear where I could bring value to that team. But curious your thoughts.
No, I thought it was really good. I think the main thing that I saw there was, like, one, you also brought it back to like why you were interested in tech sales, and that you have a natural aptitude for this stuff. Like, yes, you filled a void that other people aren't really comfortable with usually. So like, you actually ticked a lot of boxes just with that one answer, and you took something that was so far-fetched, and you still managed to make me like understand, okay, he's a good fit for tech sales because X, Y, Z. Yeah. So like, yeah, I thought it was really good. And yeah, exactly to your point too, you don't have to go like out of your way to like be the star or anything else. You just did something very simple, but you did it really, really well. And this is how it ties back to like you being here today, this being a good fit. So yeah, I thought that was spot on.
Awesome.
Really, really good. Eric, where do you want your career to be in 5 years?
Yeah, for me, I know I've got to prove it in tech sales, but I mean, let's call it what it is. I am driven by the potential for higher compensation, and 5 years from now, I know anywhere from 5 to 8 to maybe 10 years is where you really kind of get into the peak earnings of your tech sales career. So for me right now, from what I've researched about the career, I see myself, really trying to promote and get to the enterprise account executive position. And then from there, which hopefully happens around that 5-year mark, I'll assess, do I still enjoy being an individual sales rep? And at that point, I could see a situation where I go into management, but obviously that's 5 years away. And I think regardless, I feel very, very confident that tech sales will get me to that path where I want to be, regardless of if it's as an individual seller or a manager or whatever it might be. So.
Nice. How'd you feel?
Good. I think, again, this is one where you want to highlight that you're aware of the career, not just like it is good to say that you want more money and you're driven by performance-based careers. But I think really articulating that you're coming in as an SDR with the goal to promote to either enterprise account executive and or management director, VP, and just creating that story too. Not like I want to be a VP of sales someday, So it's just
CEO.
Like yeah. So I think just that little bit of detail, again, to your earlier point, and I'll kick it over to you for feedback. But it's just showing them that you know what you're getting into and that you're excited about it, regardless of the exact thing where it finishes. But curious your thoughts.
No, I thought that was really good. And yeah, I think just like staying realistic, right? You can always call it the fact that like the reason why I want to get into tech sales is because I want to be an account executive. I know the SDR function is extremely essential because he needs to fill up their pipeline, blah, blah, blah. Like
that's a great one.
You're just using like every single little thing that they're asking you to like assert in a very subtle way that like you understand, like you get it. Like, and you're also not expecting You know, like you can even break it down. So you could say like, hey, like, you know, my goal for the next 18 months is to become a top performing SDR. I want to understand exactly what it takes for me to get into a position where I don't have to rely on like inbound lead flow, where I actually can go out and prospect, you know, make up my own success as an account executive. From there, I want to, one, learn what it takes to be an account executive, then become a top performing account executive. I personally really like to coach. So again, like, you know, if you would have asked me 3 years ago if I would have been in tech sales, I would have been like, hell no. But here we are. And so like, who knows what's going to happen in 5 years, but I could definitely see myself maybe being in a leadership position or something else. So again,
great
like,
example.
I think that's really good because like nobody really thinks they're going to end up in sales. Like, let's just call it for what it is, right? Like, and every time I say that, they're always like, yeah, I didn't think I was going to be in tech sales either, you know, but here we are. So I just think that's a funny way to like put a spin on it. But yeah, like this is an opportunity for you to show that like, one, you understand what the track is like, like what are you getting yourself into? What's the next step? And also just like not expecting that the next step is going to happen within 12 months. I think that's a big thing too, is like something that I was really naive about when I first got in was like, oh my God, I'm just going to come in and crush it. And I'm going to be like the number one person for 6 months. And then you're going to promote me and I'm going to be your boss, you know? And it's like, that's not what they want to hear. Right. Like they want to hear that like, you're okay with being in a position here where like you've proven success over a longer period and now you're ready for the next step. So yeah, anyway.
No, great point. I think that was a great way to see the answer answered fundamentally differently, but still achieve the same result. So it's like, there's no one way here. And I think that point's being communicated well. So anyway.
100%. Eric,
how many more, by the way? We're deep, man.
We have 11 more.
Okay.
All right, cool. We'll get through these pretty quick. Eric, what separates the best SDRs from the worst?
Yeah, you know, I think the things that stand out to me, like I said, I've gone out of my way to network. I have a lot of former classmates and actually a couple teammates that are in tech sales at this point, and I think it's, you know, obviously, you know, early on, it's making sure you understand the product, the environment, the types of people you're selling to. And obviously there's fundamental things like staying organized, making sure you're getting your tasks done. But I think it's, you know, really ideally you're a self-starter, and sure, you're looking to learn from the best. But learning from the best doesn't mean I'm asking them every day of how do I do this? How should I do this, right? Ideally, you're not just learning and getting better, but you're really able very quickly within 3 to 6 months to own and command your book of business and just continue growing from there with ideally, you know, consistent training and feedback, but not the need to have someone to tell you exactly what to do. So yeah.
Nice. How'd you feel?
That was pretty good. I think that's definitely a passable answer. I'd be curious to your thoughts on how to go about it, but I think that was good. Like when I look back on it, kind of cookie cutter answer and like standard things you could say. But again, I don't think that answer would have been like I think that would have been like, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Next question.
No, and I mean, again, like you're literally being put on the spot. So like you don't have any notes. It's kind of impressive that you can just get through all of these. I'm personally like more of a visual person. So like I need to have this in front of me even as I'm like interviewing. But I think the one nuance with this specifically is like they just want to see that like you understand that the best SDRs have a system. They have specific workflows that they're following. They're not just attacking every single day at random. Like they're following a proven framework, right? They figured out what works and they're sticking to it, right? You can even talk about like time blocking. You can talk about like how, you know, you want to get into a habit of, you know, not waking up every single day wondering what your next move is. Like, you know exactly what you're going to be doing. This is what brings success. This is what others have done historically. So I think, again, just like showing them that like you have a system. This was a big one for me. Like I would always come back to the fact that like, hey, I would always reverse engineer it. So if I knew that I needed to get 10 opportunities, you know, I would actually reverse engineer it. I would look at like, okay, you know, what percentage of my meetings would end up converting into opportunities? And again, you need to have some data here, but they're just looking for your process here, right? Like break it down to where like, okay, I know I need 10 meetings to get 5 opportunities. I need to cold call 200 people to get 10 meetings. And so I need to allocate time to get 200 calls. Again,
no, great answer.
Break it down into like, you know, a simple system and a workflow. Don't leave things up to, you know, random.
No, it's a great call out.
So, but I still thought it was pretty good, and especially for being put on the spot like that. Eric, how do you feel about competition and being compared to your peers?
Yeah, you know, for me, like I said, I think if nothing else, like I've talked about my competitive background, and obviously that's something that excites me. But I think at the end of the day, for someone who likes competition, it's about the fact that it's not comfortable all the time, and it does push you to really figure it out, to be honest with you. Because like I said, I'm fortunate for all the experiences that I had before. And, I was never the straight A student, but I was always pretty good at school and could figure it out pretty easily. And that's great. And there's a comfortable, path ahead playing to your comfort. But at the end of the day, whether it's sports, whether it's something like sales, competition forces you to compete at the highest level or move on to a different career. And I think that ultimately at the end of the day is what excites me the most about it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I think that was pretty solid. I don't know if you have anything else.
No, honestly, it's pretty much good. And yeah, for anyone watching, it's just, if you don't have the sports background, it's just competition forces you to compete at your highest level and figure it out. Like that's the takeaway, and acknowledging that you're excited about that is how you want to answer that.
Yeah.
Like I think it's pretty straightforward.
They just want to hear that like you're excited.
Yeah.
Like it's not a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're like on the fence and you start saying like, I hope it'll be fine once I get into it. Like, no, what they want to hear from you there is just like, hey, yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to that. Because I'm the type of person who thrive whenever there's competition. Like I feel like people always push me to be better. If I don't have that environment, then it's very easy just like to put your feet up and chill.
Yeah.
So that's another way. Eric, how do you handle rejection?
Yeah. I think it's funny, similar to competition, right? Like it's usually, aside from the one-offs, maybe sometimes you get rejected, wrong place, wrong time, and that's going to happen. But I think honestly, kind of going back to a piece of competition, if you will, if you're getting rejected, whether that's, not making the roster or not getting the grade that you want or failing a assignment or something, like it's feedback, and it's not comfortable. It doesn't mean I necessarily like look forward to it, but I recognize it as a necessary piece of evolution and improving. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to elaborate, but that's kind of my outlook on it.
No, that was good.
Yeah.
For this one, for me specifically, I'm very systematic. So my answer for this, and I'm curious what you actually would think on this, is like, one, I look at failure as like a means to improve. And this is where it gets a little bit zen, but like, you can twist it into like, you have a system for how you deal with rejection. And so like, for instance, I mean, this would mostly be like if you're already an SDR, but you can talk about like how in the past, like whenever you've been met with like a terrible situation, or even like as you're going through like the interview question, right, or the interview process right now with different folks, you're looking to improve, you're looking to find ways to like put yourself in a better light. So if there's ever anything where I stumble, where I mess up, I write it down and I practice it. Because like one, if you use the interview example that you're actively improving right now, maybe like come time for this specific interview, you're actually performing really, really well. But they get some insight into like, how did you become so good? Well, the way I became good was every time I mess up, I write it down. I practice it in front of the mirror until I get to a point where like, now this is so innate to me. And what are you going to be doing in your role? Well, you're going to be prospecting, you're going to be cold calling. And so like, that's the exact framework they want to hear. If you mention that to them, like they literally will see that like you're probably like leaps and bounds ahead of other people on their team, because other people on their team, they're going to get a rejection and not touch the phone for another 2 weeks, right? Yeah. And so like if you can mention that, like again, subtle ways of saying I'm already doing the things that will make me super successful here, right? Yeah. So yeah, like that's one thing that I would say, and like especially if you already are an active rep, or like if you're looking to move up, like say you mess up on a call, or like you're already an SDR, I write it down and make sure that like next time I go into a call and I hear that objection, boom, I know exactly what to say.
Nice. No, honestly, I think that's a better answer. So,
but it's easier for me to sit here while I'm looking at the the specific ones. But again, like this is also what I would urge anybody else out there, to be doing. Like as you're going through these, right? Like as you're going through all of these different questions, if there's any of these questions or anything outside of this that stumbles you particularly during an interview, write it down. Write it down and practice it, because if you don't write it down, you're just gonna mess up over and over and over, right? Yeah. And so like this is the easiest thing. Like this is mostly like an asset test of like, are you willing to go through like the hardships of being told no, of being put in these awkward situations? But in the end, once you've been through enough interviews, you're literally gonna hear something and you're gonna be like, oh, perfect, I know exactly what to say here, and you're just gonna say it like it was innate to you. So anyway,
well, I think and we can definitely move to the next one. But like literally, like this is the amount of prep I did in college, and like I mean, sales, like being in sales has helped me, be able to improvise on the fly. But like to your point, like there was a good like year when I was coming up on graduation, my senior year where they had career fairs and whatnot, the year prior, like I did all of this in extreme depth. And like I literally pulled that, senior class example off the top of my head because I wrote that down in extreme depth like 10 years ago. So anyway.
Yep, that's the way. Okay, cool. Eric, when's the last time you received constructive feedback?
Yeah, I would actually say at my last job, we rolled out new processes, and it was a transition time for the company. They had just released a new product, and it seemed like, and there was broader frustration amongst my peers of how often we were changing our approach. So, and I think this is just growing pains of being a startup, introducing a new product, but it was just like every month we would spend a month really trying to get up to speed on all the marketing and sales and go-to-market changes. And then they completely changed it again. And so it was just, it just like, all that to say, we were on a group call and I was kind of the first one to really voice my frustrations about it. And unfortunately, I mean, it was all constructive, but I kind of got in a direct confrontation with my manager and it really upset him. And so the feedback was like, hey, like point heard, and like at the end of the day, it's good that we had this conversation, but that is not the forum to bring up these complaints when a manager is now feeling like it's like 10 against 1. So point heard there, and like definitely improved on that. But it was honestly at the end of the day, I think it was the best thing that happened because we finally just got it out there. Kind of 3 to 6 months of pent up frustration, and we also kind of set up a new rules of engagement moving forward to make sure that that message was communicated effectively in the future. So,
how'd you feel about it?
Solid. Yeah, I think that's a good example. And again, not every question has to be that star format, but I think the important thing there is setting the stage of the story and why it was even important in the first place, not just going into the story. And then also making sure to just highlight the outcome. And it doesn't have to be like we became best friends and he was the best man at my wedding, but make there at least some positive outcome of that interaction, not just I received feedback and I improved. Like try and just give a little bit more context as to the outcome. But your thoughts?
No, this one's tough, and this was one that I actually used to mess up on quite a lot because my mind would automatically go to the most extreme situation. It's why it's a good question for interviewers to ask, because it really quickly gives them a pulse check of like, okay, like what was the last conflict that you had? So if I were to give any feedback, it would probably be like maybe a smaller confrontation. Like, because like you just want to get through this question in a way, right? Like,
that's a good point.
Like they kind of like, they're kind of like testing you here to see like, what was the last big thing that like you got into? Yeah. And so like, if you like, for me, for instance, it was like, oh yeah, like we actually just had at my work, we just implemented like a new framework. And so for me, it was really just getting feedback on like how I use that framework in my day-to-day workflow. So like, that's a very like subtle way of overcoming like a very strong question. Yeah. Because like the thing is here, like whatever you say adds a lot of risk, right? Yeah. So the impression that might leave like a recruiter is like, oh, you're getting into conflicts with your manager, like on calls, you know what I mean? Yeah. That being said, you handled it really well. And I think, but I think this is where I would mess up a lot, is like I would go down that rabbit hole. And I think you're really good on the fly, but the average person isn't necessarily as sharp.
Yeah, might walk themselves into a trap.
And I would walk myself into a trap there, and I would actually end up making myself look bad.
That's a great point.
So that being said, you handled it really well, but for me, I actually tone this down a lot, and I keep it really, really subtle, and I just get through this question in a way. Yeah. And if they start probing more, you can just be like, oh yeah, like I don't really, they just want to know that like you don't usually get into confrontations. That's really like the way to win here. Yeah. In my mind.
At most you've had like healthy confrontation,
right?
But
like small,
it's never been like horrible, right? Yeah.
Because they also don't want to get into a position where like they have somebody like directly confronting them on like a big call or something. Yeah. So, but that being said, I think you handled it really, really well. Yeah. Let me see what's the next one here. Eric, what do you think are the biggest reasons why salespeople fail?
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, a couple that immediately come to mind. Certainly not that knowing the product makes you a great salesperson, but I think there's a reputation of salespeople are, dumb people or just overly confident people. And I think for me, especially selling something highly technical, that's going to be a huge emphasis, is making sure I know a lot about it to make sure I'm actually a reputable source when talking to folks. So that's kind of a foundational piece, but I would say more on the day-to-day. It's obviously the person that's not organized at the highest level. And what that actually means is they're coming in every day and they're just kind of thinking like, oh, what should I do? They're not putting any systems or maybe even automation once you get more advanced into their workflow. And they're also struggling to even just hit, like they see the KPIs that they need to do on a daily basis. And that's like the goal, not the minimum. You know, and I think that's a big thing I've seen where a lot of people just try to get through it versus a lot of, I think high performers, 10 to 20% of people really want to maximize their efforts and compound their efforts, not just do what's required.
Perfect. I think the big one here is just, do you have a system?
Yeah.
That's the big one. But yeah, do you have anything else on that?
No, there's a lot of ways you could take that, short and concise. And so I'd say just 2 to 3 items max. To your point, like talk about system, compounding, improvement over time. And just, I think there's a lot of good takeaways there, but there's no one perfect answer. But I do think talking about systematizing, getting smarter over time, those types of things, absolutely.
Yep. And also maybe getting comfortable. Like, you know, as salespeople, we have to always kind of be on top of things. Like if you put your feet up, once you start crushing it, you kind of forget like what got you there in the first place. Well, it was because you were proactive. You were filling up your pipeline consistently. So like, I think not getting content, you know, always keeping your foot on the pedal. So, but yeah, I think the big one here that I always win with is having a system in place, not doing things at random. Okay, Eric, tell me about your salary expectations.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I know going into a sales career, there's a base component and a commission component, which is obviously exciting. And I would say I've kind of seen a lot of different things based on a couple of conversations I have going and also what I've seen online. You know, I know territory, accelerators, average quota attainment are things that come into mind. So I guess with that being said, I'm just curious if there's kind of a standard range that you have for the SDR position.
Yeah, so our range is between 70 and 90, depending on, you know, obviously your experience and how much the team likes you and different factors there. Does that align with what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think so. And that's in line. And obviously, you know, we have a couple stages to go. And if it ultimately is a fit and an offer is discussed, we can definitely get more specific too.
Cool. How'd you feel?
Solid. Yeah, I think, you know, for everyone watching, the big takeaway there is ideally you never give a number. I will say, you know, be prepared as a backup. I've seen recruiters get more and more persistent on asking, so have it ready. But I think that's the other important thing, aside from asking them if they have a range for the position, is also just subtly, not in their face, but bringing up the fact that you do have multiple conversations going on. Because, for instance, when Chris gave me the range of 70 to 90 there, now when we're in like the final stages, they are expecting that I'm probably going to have an offer from somewhere else. And it's not going to be a surprise to them when I come to the table and say, hey, you know, this is a great offer at 80K. And I know you mentioned the range was up to 90. Fully transparent, I do have an offer on the table for 85. And if you would be willing to meet me at 90K, then I'd be ready to sign and join the team today. You know, and so that's a whole separate video in of itself in terms of negotiation. But the point being, ideally have them give you the range, so you don't undersell yourself, and also just reiterate that you do some of this thought process is you've been talking to a lot of companies and you've seen a bit of a range yourself. But any other thoughts?
No, I mean, that's usually like how I tackle it too. I like to give a really big range. Obviously, like that's harder to do in the SDR world because obviously, like, you know, the comp is much smaller. But yeah, like I would just tell them like, hey, that depends on a lot of different factors that I'm not really aware of today. Like compensation, I mean, I think that you kind of covered those pretty well, but like compensation, accelerators, how many people are hitting their number, all those different things. But based on that, it would be anywhere between, I mean, you could say 60 to 100K.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like if they tell you like, you know, hey, I really need like a specific number, you can throw it back on them just like you did. Mm-hmm. And then see like, yeah, that kind of aligns. Obviously, like I need to have more conversations, but then we can go from there.
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty like solid, pretty spot on.
Yeah.
Eric, what is your biggest weakness?
You know, I think for me, it's been kind of like I mentioned before, you know, I've really wanted to go into sales for a long time. And I think, you know, for me, it's probably analysis paralysis. I overthought the change. I think in my specific situation, I had kind of sunk cost fallacy, if you will, with engineering. I put so much time to get into that I probably overthought how drastic of a change tech sales would be to my career. So it's definitely something I'm working on, and I recognize, I think the analytical portion of my personality and brain can be an asset and differentiated, but I definitely know there's limits, and I want to be very careful to not overthink things going forward. So hopefully getting better at that over time.
Yep. That's solid. What do you think?
Yeah, solid. I mean, there's a myriad of answers you could do there. And I think if there's one takeaway, for whoever's watching, is I think you're too much, like the way that I would spin it is too much of one thing can be bad. And you don't want to say like, oh, you don't want to spin it and say like, oh, this is bad, but like, I know how to control it. Like you do want to admit that like your weakness or your personality trait that has a negative connotation has impacted you before. And you've started to recognize the limits. You're not necessarily perfect, but also slightly spin it into a benefit, but not in a way that's like, you have to make yourself 100% look good. Because I have friends and people in my network that are recruiters, and they hate when people do that, that say like, this is a weakness, but I did X, Y, and Z, so it's actually a strength. And it's like, that's a bad answer. But if you can kind of play to both sides, I think that's the sweet spot.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think like, again, that one is just about like, mitigating risk as much as possible, but also being like genuine and not like saying like an inverse of something else, So I 100% agree. One thing that I usually like to say is like, my biggest problem is I tend to like go a little bit too deep. I tend to like do too much in the sense that like I get lost in the details. And so for me, just taking a step back, like finding that balance between like, oh, I don't have to be doing this 24/7. Sometimes like having a bit of a balance, taking a step back, sometimes helps me make better decisions, and also like tapping other people, not being so like, in my own brain about it.
Yeah, for sure. The last thing I'd add, and we don't have to answer it, but just in that situation, regardless of our answers, I would be prepared to have them ask, could you give me an example of that? So that's one thing I'd be wary of, is just they'd say, oh, that's great. Could you give me an example? So one thing to prepare. We won't do it on this episode, but yeah, solid answer.
100%. Okay, Eric, what do you think is going to be the most challenging part of you going into tech sales?
Yeah, honestly, kind of on my last answer of being overly analytical. I know I'm very excited to make that transition and jump into an SDR role head first, but I also imagine there's going to be like, there's in theory an infinite number of things I could learn, right? Not just the product, cold calling, competitors, ideal customer profile, not to mention networking and building good rapport with my teammates. There's a lot of things that I think could be distracting and I could overemphasize. So I think, that's probably going to be the toughest challenge. And my hope is that, wherever I do ultimately land, I'm able to identify some top performers. I'm able to build rapport with my manager and really just make sure that all the advice that I'm getting is from someone who has had success themselves, who has really, puts an emphasis on developing themselves and their team members. And I think ideally that's how I can combat it. But I'm definitely aware of sometimes I might get too obsessed on one thing or overthink the importance of something for sure.
Nice. How'd you feel?
Solid. I think I caught myself getting a little long-winded, so I shut it down there at the end. But yeah, I think, another one where there's no perfect answer. I think the important thing that I tried to do there is bring it back to recognizing it's a weakness. But ideally, whether you've watched videos like this or you have people in your network showing like, I've done some more than surface level research. Like, because again, a surface level way to answer that question is like, well, I'm very, I get really deep into things and like, I kind of have that impulsive, addictive personality. So, I know sometimes I might go too deep. And on the surface, that's like the same answer. But I think the level at which I answered it there, talking about like, hey, I could get distracted learning the product. I could get distracted or overly obsessed with how to perfect a cold call. Or I could get, distracted by these SDR company specific things. That's just another subconscious way that you're communicating that like, you're ready to do this. You've done your research and you're a great candidate, but curious your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think it was really good. I think, kind of echoing the same notion, like if you can somehow give them an idea of like what you're planning on doing. You could say like right now, hypothetically speaking, I don't know who the top performers are. So like my biggest obstacle will be figuring out like who is best in their own respective categories. So like I know for a fact that like different people are better at certain things. So like I got to figure out like who's the best person at cold calling, who's the best person at prospecting, who's the best person at like, finding leads. Like again, you're just finding these little loopholes where you can throw in the fact that like, damn, you already know like most of the job.
Yeah.
But you also know like, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing. And the way that I typically like to assert it too is like, I'm a big person that believes in, or not, I'm not a big person, but I'm a person that believes in emulation, right? And so I want to surround myself with the top performers. And so the biggest obstacle for me will be identifying like, how do I figure out like who the best people are? Something like that.
Yeah, great answer. Great answer.
Okay, cool. Eric, what can you tell us about yourself that's not on your resume?
You know, honestly, kind of a fun hobby. And, you know, I think I've mentioned kind of my analytical past. Really interesting hobby of mine that I've picked up is I'm actually a specialty coffee roaster. So I own like cafe grade equipment. I actually had to negotiate a coffee roaster in Cleveland when they were upgrading machines and getting rid of their old one. I had like an awesome negotiation. So I actually have like a full on production level coffee roaster in my home. And it's something I definitely geek out really hard on. And I'm happy to talk more about it. But yeah, that's a huge hobby of mine. So I don't know if you drink coffee, but if this is the right time to geek out on it, but I'm definitely happy to talk about it if you are. So
nice. I like that one. How'd you feel about that one?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways you could go. It's definitely an opportunity to bring in a relevant story from your professional career that maybe you've forgotten up to that point. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a funny, kind of chill personal story. I do think it's a great time to bring back in something else if you realize you glossed over it. But at the same time, like if, you know, for instance, like my style is generally more buttoned up, I would say like, you know, even though I'm improvising, I'm kind of like formal and pretty like, seem pretty rigid as opposed to like creating like a chill laid back vibe. But I think if like in my case, how I've been kind of rigid and strict, if you will, with my responses and very buttoned up corporate professional, that's also a good opportunity to kind of like show the other side of yourself, that like a passion or a hobby, to kind of mix it up and be like, oh wow, this guy was like super intense, but he seems pretty chill as well. You know, and I know I'm oversimplifying, but I'm curious your thoughts too.
No, I think, again, it all comes down to like reading the room, right? So like every conversation is gonna be different. So like, if the conversation has been super stringent up until this point, like super strict, then this is an opportunity, if you feel like it'll be well received from the other end, to like take a step back and be like, like this is a hobby that I have. It's actually super cool. Obviously it doesn't have too much to do with tech sales, but and you know, it's just a way to like kind of connect. And bonus points too, if you can somehow bring it back to like their background. You can always use like, you know, I don't know if you're into this because I saw on your profile that like you did XYZ. But like this is just something that I love during my spare time. So but it's just a very easy way to like lower somebody's guard. And they're asking you that for a reason. They probably don't want to like know more about you if they've already like bombarded you with questions. Like professionally, they probably want to know a little bit more about like your hobbies. What are you doing? So I thought that was really good.
Fun fact, all that stuff.
100%. Eric, tell me about a personal setback and how you handled it.
You know, like I mentioned, I was an engineer for 3 years, and I think it was funny. I had worked at a large company in college as an intern, but it was a Department of Defense, like very closely tied to the government job. And I convinced myself that it was because of kind of the bureaucratic environment that I didn't like it. But then I went to a large company as my first job out of school, and same thing, I found myself not really liking it. And long story short, ultimately, with my final engineering job, I was like, I figured it out. I just need to go to a startup. And the last year I was an engineer, I actually worked at a 35-person startup and realized really quickly that actually engineering was kind of the problem. And I think, again, going back to something I mentioned earlier, like I don't regret this at all because I've learned so much from it. But I do think a setback professionally, those are 2 to 3 years that I wasted when I could have been on the right career path for me and really building a skill set that is going to build my future and not just kind of cling on to what got me there, which was my engineering degree. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, kind of sunk cost fallacy and just more worried than anything about walking away from that when that had previously been such a huge focus of mine.
That was good. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I think that's another one where I think for whatever reason, I don't know if it's I've done so many of these or what, like I can kind of make it like more fluid, like a previous answer. I do think, you know, for everyone watching, that's another one where kind of the star format, I didn't really follow it there. But if you have a very concrete example, you lost a game or a championship or a tournament, or you failed a presentation because you were being dumb or whatever, you know, those are concrete examples that would work well in the star format. I know that was a bit more fluid, but that's something that I really like to do and kind of control the interview by keeping it relevant to the interview. And you know, you got to pick your spots, but I'd be curious if you have, you know, a good counterexample or a different, you know, other feedback to add.
No, I mean, I actually thought it was really good. Again, like we've talked about this specific question, so many different nuances. So I know that you're kind of thinking of different examples, different ways to propose it. I think here, like they just want to sort of, again, we've tackled this like 3 or 4 times, but they just want to hear you like present what it was, what happened, like how did you react to whatever happened, right? Because like, and you can always tie it back to like, hey, like for example, you know, I know that I'm going to be dealing with rejection all the time, but I think like that's where you have an opportunity to grow. For instance, like if you stay off the phones, you're never really going to get better at it. I'm never really going to be more confident as a person. And so that's sort of what I learned out of my experience from XYZ, you know? And so in the same way, I'm going to tackle tech sales or being an SDR, you know? So like always bringing it back to like, remember the outcome of the entire interview is like, obviously one, make them like you, like your personality, your energy, but also make them believe that they have to go through the least amount of resistance to turn you into somebody who will perform.
Absolutely.
Like they just want to hire somebody who will make their life easier.
Yeah. If
they have an SDR who has like 3 years of experience, which like they probably shouldn't be going for that role. If like there's a bunch of entry-level candidates, like obviously they'll prefer that person unless they're like, you know, incompetent in certain degrees and different things, right? But you, as somebody who doesn't have experience, if you can impose these different notions, if you can show them that like you already get it, you know what you're getting yourself into, you understand it, you're not going to be like absolute newbie because you've done your research, right? So like, again,
no, really well said.
So okay, Eric, why should we hire you?
Yeah, you know, I'm sure, you know, given how strong your brand is, you've got a lot of candidates that are interviewing with you, and you know, I know it's a decision you're ultimately going to have to make. The way that I see it is, you know, in my particular situation, when compared to other folks that maybe have sales experience or are new college graduates, I have the benefit and perspective of having been in engineering for 3 years. You know, I do have customer facing experience with some of the largest brands in the world. And these are brands that I've seen on your website that are customers currently as well. And I think for me, you know, I think differentiated maybe is my analytical ability. So I know its limits, and I know that just being smart as an engineer is not going to make me a great salesperson. But in my mind, and definitely what I've learned from my peers, is the ones that are the most savvy around the product, it's much easier to teach them sales skills and for them to develop those through their own grit and will, versus someone who's not willing to dive deep and gets freaked out by technical documentation or is not really willing to put in the work. So, and really outside of that, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, it is your decision. But I think, you know, having been a Dean's List scholar in engineering, having made, you know, the national team and having been able to compete around the world, I've been able to find success in different domains. And for me, I know it's going to take time and I need to learn a lot. But I'm confident that I can really become a top performer in tech sales as I've done in multiple other endeavors before. So,
nice. How'd you feel about it?
Yeah, it was good. It was a bit long-winded, but I would say actually in hindsight, I know based on our first question, we were like, there should never be an answer, you know, really longer than 90 seconds. I think this is a great opportunity to really close yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think you got to pick your spots. And you don't want to be naive, like I've always been the best at everything I've ever done ever, and I will be the best for you. That's a little too intense, at least right now. I feel like that dialogue doesn't necessarily hit home.
Yeah.
But I do think, you know, you can't hold back here. You got to be, and like in my case, don't get, you know, if you don't have athletic experience, you haven't played for Team USA, like it's fine. Like just find wins that you've had to work particularly hard for. And whether it's reiterating that, you know, if not just the generic, like if I put my mind to something, I'll become number one, have evidence of something you've done. Yeah. So, you know, if it's like, hey, I had to, you know, I've always worked really hard, but specifically, you know, going to college and having to work 2 jobs to support myself through that entire process, I recognize versus some of my peers, more power to them that were partying on Thursday night. That's a luxury I didn't have.
Yeah.
But all the experience I gained in doing that, I think sets me up incredibly well from a work ethic standpoint. And, you know, there's so many ways you could peel it back, and I'll definitely get your feedback, but that's one. Aside from the specific tactics of how to answer the question, you can't hold back here. You got to go for it, and it's an invitation to sell yourself. Like they want you to finish strong here. Yep. So curious what your thoughts are.
No, I agree. I mean, I think there's so many ways to tackle this. The way that I like to do this one is to lay it out logically. Like I would say, hey, you know, great question. Appreciate the, you know, straightforwardness. If I was in your shoes, I'd be looking for somebody who has X, Y, Z. You know, I definitely believe that I have that based on, insert, the exact same points that you were talking about. So I hope that, I showed that throughout this interview, but I'm curious, like, if there's anything I can elaborate on or if you have any hesitations.
Yeah.
That's exactly like the framework. Obviously, you got to fill in the pieces with your specific background, but yeah, 100%. Like, and it doesn't have to be like, I really love that you said that. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. It's mostly about like your tone, your delivery.
Yeah.
Right. And if you've done a really good job up until now, and this is a very aggressive question, so it's not necessarily, you're not going to get this all the time, but you're definitely going to have a high likelihood of getting it, especially if you go into more competitive processes. They mostly just want to see that you don't mess up, to be honest, right? But yeah, if you can ace the question and really sell yourself, like, that's pretty solid.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. Last question here. Do you have any questions for me, Eric?
Of course I do, yeah. And for everyone watching, this video has gone so long and it's been a great role play and exercise. We're actually going to make a separate video. So depending on when you've watched this, that video may or may not exist, but we will put it in the suggested next video. You should absolutely ask about 3 questions. We're going to give you numerous different examples in that video. But the last thing I'd say, regardless of what questions you ask, the last one you ask should always be, Chris, I really appreciate the conversation today. And I'm just curious, based on the conversation we've had, if you have any hesitations pushing me forward to the next round.
No, Eric. I think you did just barely well enough here. I'm just kidding. No, you crushed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 100%. I mean, this was really, really valuable. I think this was probably like our most in-depth pod so far. Yeah. And obviously, like, you have a lot of tech sales experience and everything else. If you're out there and you're watching this, like, don't be scared by that. Yeah. Again, you can look at these, you can write them down, you can practice these in the mirror. Like, we've been through this a lot of times. We've helped a lot of students with this inside of our community, inside of higher levels. But hopefully this brings a lot of clarity, and apply these and you'll be well on your way to absolutely crushing it. So, but this was super, super good.
I was going to say, if I could add one last thing in closing too, it's like, if you're young, if you're 18 to 25, a lot of times people undervalue the experiences they have when they think like, oh, I did this, but I don't think that's a strong enough story. Get it all out there, write it out, and you'd be surprised at how many things are at least above average. And even just the way you portray them is going to set you apart. And that's just one thing I want to reemphasize. I know that wasn't necessarily the super smooth closing we wanted on the episode, but I think get it all out there and you'd be amazed. Like, by the time I was 25, I had like competed internationally. I had done all these different things. And now going from 25 to like 31, 32, I feel like in those 7 years, I've learned so much more about corporate that I had no idea about before. And when I was interviewing, when I was 23 to 25, I thought I had done a ton of shit. So, like, trust me, there's always things that you can make more impressive. There's always stories that you're probably undervaluing when it comes to these questions. And like, don't be shy. Get them out there on paper and know that, if you fail an interview or two, it's an opportunity to improve it, make it more impressive, et cetera. So just wanted to end on that, but I'll hand it back to you for any other closing thoughts.
No, I think that's exactly it. And I think, remember too, that tech sales is one of the most unique fields in the sense that, like, a lot of the work here before you even get into the interview, like, you can actually really, really portray yourself as a really strong candidate. So again, we talk about this a lot more in like other episodes. But, if you're out there, you're wanting to break into tech sales, we obviously, shameless plug here, we have higher levels. We have an entire academy. We've helped hundreds of students break in. So definitely check that out. And we'll obviously leave the timestamps down below. But this was a killer episode.
And if you made it this far and you haven't subscribed, I mean, come on, guys. Like, what else can we do for you? So just like and subscribe and all that stuff. So we'll see you on the next one.
See you guys.